Okay, so I've really been looking forward to this conversation with you, Johnny, because first, you are the first principal that I've ever had on my podcast. So welcome to the show.
I'm honored. Thank you. I'm happy to
Yeah.
be here.
And okay, so you are the principal at the Middleton High School,
hmm
but the reason we know each other is because you were the vice principal at Eagle High School, like where my kids go.
Yes, I was.
And I'm going to tell this story just so everyone, just so that we're on the same page
hmm
with how our experience started out together. So we first met when my oldest was a sophomore and we started. This was like right after this was like the fall of COVID.
Yep. My first year at Eagle as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just had, gosh, now I'm trying to think. Okay, I had one kid at the high school. Okay, it doesn't matter to the story. So my kid's a sophomore and he's starting, all the classes. He doesn't know anyone. And at Eagle High, there was that every other day, right?
Yeah.
So they're on one day and then they're online the other day, like
Yeah.
in school online. And so my kid's like taking this class, and after like a week and a half or whatever, he realizes that like he's got to drop this class because there's just too many other hard things going on in his other classes. So I'm like, that's fine. Let's just email the counselor and we'll get you dropped from this class. So my son emails the counselor. Counselor responds, "You're past the add drop date. You can't drop
Right.
this class." And I was like, what? Come on. So I email the counselor. The counselor gets the vice principal involved,
hmm
and that's you.
Yes.
And so you and I have this conversation, and you're like, well, it's, like the policy says we're not supposed to do that. And I say to you, I'm like, yes, I can totally appreciate you have this policy, but also our kids are in this situation that they've never been in before,
Yeah.
right? Like we're in the middle of COVID and we're every other day, and he's only experiencing this class really kind of in person every other day.
hmm
We need to do what's best for kids. Like that's my statement to you as a parent. And your response is, I agree with you.
hmm
Yeah, let's take care of this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm sold on this guy. That was kind of our first interaction. And
Mhm.
so I so appreciated that, like, as a parent, and, here's the administrator getting involved. I can appreciate that not all parents have that interaction that
Mhm.
first time with some of their administrators. But for me, it like set the tone of our relationship, our interactions going
Mhm.
forward. And what it really did was help me see that for you, kids need to come first in this process of
Yeah.
education.
Yeah. That's definitely a guiding principle of mine. So you probably just saying that alone was enough to make me, well, okay, we better do this then. But I will say though, there are times where I use that guiding principle and I would still say no in certain situations. Like that's just something as an administrator, you have to make those judgment calls sometimes as a leader and just in anything. Like you have to follow your guiding principles, and sometimes, and I'm willing to admit I'm wrong lots of times. And so in that situation, at least I felt like, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And I can't even remember exactly everything that surrounded that decision. But yeah, if that's kind of our North Star is what's best for kids, then you typically can't go wrong.
I 100% agree. So, okay, so let's talk about you a little bit. So
Mhm.
you're an administrator, but you didn't start out as administrator. Like
No.
what's your history with
Yeah.
education?
Okay, so I won't go too far back, but when I was in college, just kind of toyed around with a few different things that I would want to go into, education being one of those. And it really came down to, I don't have a great math brain, but I'm pretty good at like reading comprehension, things like that. So if you consider those skills, for me, it was either go into some sort of like education, teaching like the social studies or something along those lines, or law. Law was so I was trying to decide just between law school and education. I'm trying to remember if she was my girlfriend. She eventually became my wife, so I can't remember. She helped my decision, and she just was like, "What would you like? What do you actually like being around? Do you enjoy being around kids, or would you enjoy being around lawyers, or I don't know, whatever?" And so it came down to like, well, I really like being around kids. I'd done a bit of like coaching when I was in college. I worked like I was a basketball coach, and so I did like some basketball coaching of youth, and so that was appealing to me to be able to be involved around young people. And so went the education route, got my bachelor's degree in teaching social sciences, which means I can teach everything from economics to history to government to psychology. I technically never did, but you can.
And also econ.
Yeah, econ.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because econ, and that was not the one that I thought I would teach. I was thinking I'd probably teach history, but got my first job. It's actually kind of hard to get a job as a social studies teacher. Those jobs don't come open as much as like math jobs or special education jobs.
I know this because I started out as history and
Oh, there you
geography.
go. Yeah.
Yes, I totally know.
Yeah. So, but I know I wanted to stay in the West. I grew up in Idaho, grew up in Weiser, not too far from here. Really great place to grow up. And so just looked for jobs. I probably did over 30 job interviews.
Oh my
Trying to get my first teaching job.
gosh.
Yeah. So that was in Utah, Colorado, Idaho. And I was a little disheartened because it's like, gosh, I feel like I have a fair amount to offer these schools, but I wasn't interviewing well, but you get better as you go on. Finally, I had a choice. I could have gone to Colorado. There's a school in Colorado, but I just didn't feel right about it. And it was a middle school and I wasn't like super enthused about going to a middle school. I really wanted to be at a high school. So after 30 no's, I finally had a yes, and then I turned it down, which was probably stupid. But it actually worked out really well because I then applied for a couple jobs here in Idaho. Well, lots of jobs in Idaho, but had two offers here in Idaho, one at Columbia High School, one at Emmett High School. Columbia had just gone, Idaho during that time, this was in 2014. Nampa had gone through some issues. Nampa's still going through some issues, but I had gone through some issues where they'd had to furlough employees and things. So I was like, Emmett seems a bit more stable. So accepted my first job at Emmett High School. And that first year taught econ. I'd taken like 2 or 3 econ classes is all, and was not ready for it. But it was a really good experience, and I had to I just worked my butt off teaching econ, and amongst other classes. When you're a new teacher, you often have multiple preps, and so I taught econ, U.S. history, government, and a world history class that first year.
That is a lot of different classes to be teaching.
Yeah, and now that I'm a principal and have some say in this, I try to avoid that with newer teachers. It's like, I don't want to put 4 preps on a new teacher. It's because it's really hard. It's a lot easier when you're teaching the same thing every day because lesson planning, it just takes up so much time as a teacher. That's especially coming in new and you haven't lesson planned, like you don't have like all your lessons set up. It's really difficult. So, but it was an amazing experience for me because I just had to really dig into things and learn learn a course that I had like I knew U.S. history pretty well. I knew government fairly well. Econ I was pretty kind of a novice at. So it was a good experience though. And I ended up teaching econ there 2 years and all those other courses for 2 years. And then we were living in Middleton. We built a house there back when it was really cheap to build houses. It was fantastic.
I'm really happy. That's awesome. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So anyway, we were in Middleton, and a job came open in Middleton. Really nice school, and it was like 2 miles from my house. So it's like, okay, that no brainer. So got the job at Middleton. Taught many of the same courses in Middleton, except my second year at Middleton, got to take over student council, and that really formed a lot of who I became as an educator. Was getting to do student council. I'm a big proponent of it. Because I think they really affect the culture of a school. I'm big on like culture and doing things to make school like an enjoyable place to be. I think if kids if they enjoy where they're going to school, they're going to be able to learn better. It all comes back to learning. But so that was really important for me in my career trajectory, is getting to do student council. So I was at Middleton for 4 years. During that time, I also got my master's degree in educational leadership through NNU. And so got my admin degree. I had a bunch of different roles at Middleton, and I coached as well, but I did that at Emmett too. But so at Middleton, I was doing student council, teaching econ. I got to teach a law class as well, which is really cool. It's called street law, but it was awesome, just kind of basics of law and government. And then I was a tennis coach, I was a basketball coach, and a soccer coach as well, and then doing student council. And it was just like my life was pretty much consumed by the high school. I'm very fortunate in my career, though my wife has just been super supportive of all this, and we have 4 kids as well. They're very integrated in the school. They're just kind of there all the time. People know them. And I wouldn't be able to do the things I've done in my career if it wasn't for like a lot of stability in my home and with my wife. She's just fantastic that way. And she's actually teaching now. This is her first year. She's teaching a sports medicine class she's teaching one class at our alternative school in Middleton and one class at the high school doing sports medicine. She kind of saved our bacon. We needed a teacher. So anyway, it's kind of cool to see, like, to have another teacher in the house now and to see everything she went through and that I did in my first year as a teacher and all the lesson planning and stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm rambling now though.
No, you're good. You're good.
So yeah, you may want to cut some of that because this has become a lot. So
You're just
anyway,
fine. You're just fine. You're doing great. You're doing great.
anyway, so 4 years at Middleton, got my admin degree. I was also dean of students there, which is kind of like you handle a lot of discipline and attendance things, stuff like that, which was also a good educational experience because I learned how to like manage discipline. And so that was a good opportunity. I was an interim assistant principal for one semester because there was some dysfunction in the Middleton school district and some people had to be moved around. And so they had me be an assistant principal for one semester as well. So that was a good experience too. But most of my admin experience came at Eagle. So that first year that you and I met, that was my first year at Eagle. So after 2 years at Emmett, 4 years at Middleton, then I got an assistant principal job at Eagle High School. And I shouldn't say I wasn't surprised I got that job. I have confidence in myself and like, I feel like I'm pretty,
You were a
good.
good applicant. Yeah. Yeah. You were
But at the
confident.
same
Yeah.
time, I felt very fortunate because to me, Eagle was one of those like prestigious public high schools in the state of Idaho. And it is
Like a premier place to be.
absolutely. Yeah. So I felt very fortunate to get a job at Eagle High School. And to get to work with the great people I got to work with at Eagle. And leaving Eagle was really difficult for me because I just developed a lot of good relationships there. There's just some amazing, amazing teachers, counselors, administrators at Eagle, good friends of mine. Even like the secretarial staff is just like top notch.
Oh, yes. I love, yes, those ladies when you walk into that school and you see their faces and they smile at you.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes a big difference for, anyone walking into that school, right?
Yes.
They're like the first people we see when we walk into a school are the
Yes.
people who work in the office.
Yeah, and that's something I talk to our secretaries about. It's like, hey, you're the face of our school, and people come in, you're the first people they see. I want people to have a good impression of this school. It matters a ton to me, maybe to an unhealthy degree, but and so it's really important that they are pleasant, that they're welcoming, that they are helpful, all those things, and that's definitely how I felt with those ladies at Eagle. So yeah, I was an assistant principal for 3 years at Eagle. Got to do all sorts of fun things there. I loved being able to move up. So like you said, your son Carter was a sophomore there when I started. So I moved up with him each year. So when he was a junior, I was his principal, and as a senior, I was his principal. And it's kind of fun for me because I knew I got the Middleton principal job like spring of that year, like early spring of that year. So it was tough to leave, but it was kind of it was a good natural time because those seniors were leaving at the same time, and I got to just kind of see them off, and I didn't have to necessarily start with a new group and be like, "Sorry guys, I'm leaving now." So it's fun because you really develop a connection with those classes of kids as you move up with them as their principal, whether they got in trouble with you or just you help them through some sort of academic issue or just being around them. Yeah.
I will say, I'm going to pause you in your story. You can develop a great relationship with them, but I don't think that all principals develop great
Fair. Yeah.
relationships
Yeah.
with their kids, right? And so you developed a good relationship with them because that was important to you, right? As an administrator. And so that was something that I hadn't experienced before being at a different high school was that like, there's a principal, the structure at that high school is there's a principal and then there are 4 vice principals. And the vice principal they have lots of other jobs, but then they're aligned with a class of kids. So then what you're talking about is like they're moving up that structure. So you started with the sophomore class and then went with them their junior and senior year. And then to your point, I mean, I remember seeing you at graduation, right? And I remember thinking like, well, the kids are graduating and so is he.
Yeah,
And
in my own way. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So and it was so that was a really neat experience to get to be able to do that and just grow with those kids and just work with the great teachers at Eagle. I learned a lot doing that. So then from there, I got to come back home to Middleton, which was really, really exciting and has been fantastic. This is my second, just kind of started our second year there. So that's my education story.
That's your journey.
Yes.
That's your journey through all those things. Well, one of the things I was like thinking about, like when you were talking was first, because one of the things well, I'll say why one of the reasons I wanted to bring a principal on the podcast was because, so I took a tour around the state. It was like 2,000 miles, started in Eagle, went to Fruitland, all the way to Sandpoint, down over to Rexburg, back to Eagle. And then I went back over to Idaho Falls and saw some more parents and hit myself, hit different towns back along the way home. So it was awesome. I got to meet with a lot of parents. I met with some administrators and a school board member, and it was great. Like talking with people like right where they're at, was awesome. But one of the themes that I heard from parents in myriads of locations around the state was that not one parent complained about a teacher, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
But the parents kind of had two big takeaways, and one of their biggest issues was with administrators. Yeah. And so I thought, you know what, like I want to, there's different ways to address this and I kind of have some different avenues to address it, like in the state. And so I thought, but one way I can do that is have a conversation with an administrator on the podcast. And we can talk about that, that relationship and what goes into being an administrator and, managing a building and the culture of the building and, all these different components. I met with one of the people, we'll start here first. It was she was a retired administrator, and she said, I have this quote here. She said, when you have parents on your team, the whole school wins.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what does that mean to you to have parents on your team? What does that look like?
Yeah, that is a good quote. I would say, I think team is a good word. I like using the word teams whenever I can because it's like you have a common objective, right? And so to me, it's ensuring that you involve those vital stakeholders. As a school, it's easy to make sure your teachers are involved, right? And I shouldn't say it's easy because some schools that doesn't always happen, but it's easier, I think, just because proximity, you're all there, students, same thing. But the parents are there's a division there. And there's also, I think, sometimes a fear of involving parents because frankly, parents are a bit more of wild cards in these sorts of situations. But really just getting them on board with the vision that you have, and not even the vision you have, the shared vision that you have for what your school is going to be. Back to that objective of doing what's best for kids and making the school a culture and environment that's best for kids to be in. So yeah, I think it's just making sure that they're involved with that they have a say in things, that they have and not just a say, but that they are part of like doing the work as well, which at a high school that's unique. Like, you don't get the same, we don't necessarily have parents coming into the high school and volunteering, to make a project happen, because oftentimes kids can do that stuff. The high schoolers themselves can do that stuff. So yeah, it's doing it at the high school level is a bit different, I think.
Yeah. And so I should clarify, I guess she said when parents are on, what did she say? I said it a little bit wrong. When we have parents on our team, the whole school is better. That was the phrase she used. The whole school is better, which I agree with. Yeah. And one of the things that she kind of mentioned was that, there are these wild card parents that you talk about, but from her perspective, I thought it was interesting. She was like, listen, she's like, a majority of parents who are coming in, they care about their kid. Maybe they're, fired up about something. They mostly just want to be listened to.
Yes. Yep.
And then she would say maybe not twice a year, throughout the entire period of school, for a school year, she's like, maybe there would be two parents that were so challenging that you really kind of had to make sure you were laying some major boundaries on, right? But in general, parents were coming in because they cared, they wanted to talk about an issue, there might be some, varying viewpoints, but at the end of the day, they just really want to be heard, right? Yeah. And so it's about figuring out how to foster that type of a connection with parents. And what's interesting to me is that as I've been talking with parents, we see parents that are heavily involved at an elementary school level, and then maybe a little bit at a middle school, but mostly not at the high school. And it's interesting because for whatever we have culturally, it's as if we think that kids definitely want us around in elementary school, but then middle school, they're awkward and they're, starting to distance. And then, high school, it's like, see you never. But what I think is important for people to understand is that, that may be that's the like the development of a child.
Yeah.
They want mom and dad around in elementary school. In middle school, they're starting to distance themselves, and that's healthy. We want them to do that
Yes. Yeah.
because we want them to be ready to launch when they, when it's time for them to leave,
Yeah.
like after high school. But I think that just because kids are naturally separating from mom and dad because they are developing their own personality does not mean that mom and dad should separate themselves from that schooling experience.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And so figuring out how to keep parents connected to our middle school and high schools, I think it could be a bold statement here, but I think principals need to be a big part in that. And we have some principals who are super awesome, like who engage and go out and interact with parents. And then we have some who are super rigid and terrible. We just do.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that like I've seen, like some parents are that like they've started parent groups specifically at schools, not even so much like, Eagle High School is one, for example. There was a PTO that started there. And the reason that she started that was because she wanted parents to be more involved. And what I see are that parents are involved, like my kids are in marching band. So I'm involved in the boosters specifically for marching band, right? You've got football boosters and you have parents who are involved in the activity. But if a kid isn't involved, if their kid's not involved in an activity and then they're not on that, parent board for that activity, then they're not, connected to a school. And like, how great would it be? I was really glad that this parent started, a PTO at Eagle High School because how great is it for parents to be seeing, administration and school people when things are good. Right? Like seeing them when they're good instead of, just when they're bad. So what are things that you do at Middleton High School to try to like bridge that gap to create those good relationships with parents?
Yeah. So there's a few things. One that comes to mind that has been, it's kind of fresh on my mind because it's just something that I, as a principal, being an assistant principal doesn't prepare you for, but that I've seen as a principal is the amount of your time that's taken up by non-school things. Like, so I'm talking specifically athletics. Athletics takes up a lot of a principal's time, which is good and bad sometimes. Sometimes I'm thinking, gosh, is this as important as me, working with this teacher? Sometimes that's not the case. However, athletics and activities are really important. I say athletics because that seems to be the one that people are most passionate about. But it's true with activities as well. And we have some very passionate people about activities, band, choir, dance, cheer.
That's me. I'm the parent that's
exactly.
Yeah, activities. Yes.
Yeah. So at Middleton, I don't want to say something that is offensive. We have, there's been a reputation around Middleton of being extra hard on coaches, on dysfunction within our athletic programs, where it's like, okay, coaches aren't lasting long enough, or our programs have been really good. Don't get me wrong. Like we exceeded, I think, expectations in many ways, but there's just a lot of strife around athletic programs. And I think that's honestly true at pretty much every school. But we realized, okay, this is an issue and we need to bring all these parties together and meet on this. So we sent a letter out and said, hey, like, this is something we care deeply about. We want to address these concerns that we're getting from the community. So we got an athletic coalition together. And that coalition included, we asked for parents. We said, parents, we need you on this coalition. We got the coaches, we had administrators, athletic and school administrators. And we brought this group together and we had just really, really phenomenal meetings. We probably met 8 or so times and we're still doing a lot of this work. And we went over things like, what is the purpose of high school athletics and activities? And just kind of got all the perspectives, and we had about 15 or so people that were really into it. And we kind of laid it out like, hey, this is going to be quite a bit of work. Like you're not just coming to give your opinion. Like we're going to assign you tasks and you're going to help us revamp handbooks and we're going to make these expectation sheets for people and we're going to produce videos and all these sorts of things. So then work is ongoing. And we had this really great group of people come together and it was phenomenal. Those meetings were phenomenal because I got to hear so many different viewpoints, and we were trying to be specific with like, it wasn't just all one like demographic group that showed up, right? All one religion that showed up, or one representative sport or whatever that showed up or activity that showed up, but we tried to get a nice mix of it. And I felt like we had a really strong group that did that. And we're still working on with that group about what we're producing, but because we needed to kind of like shift the paradigm of what athletics and activities are all about. Like it's about kids having learning experiences outside of the classroom and opportunities to grow. And sometimes our focus was too much on like, oh, we have to, get a college scholarship out of this, or we have to win everything or whatever, right? Or we have concerns about playing time and things like that, when there's still value in doing a sport, even if you don't get playing time, right? So these were all discussions that we had with this group. So that was, and I'm probably getting into more detail than you need, but that meeting with that group was phenomenal. And it was one of those chances that our coaches, administrators, all the school employees got to hear from this parent coalition as well, and get their perspective on it. And there was times where they were, I don't know if heated is the right word, but just conversations where people disagreed over things, and we had to explain points of views, and there were, compromises that had to be made. But those meetings were phenomenal. And I learned a ton from it, from hearing from all these parties. I think the parents learned a lot. The coaches learned a ton from it. And I think what we'll be able to produce coming out of that should help, improve our culture and just make us kind of more of what we want to be. So that was one example that we've reached out to parents and tried to involve them in our school. We have the typical ones as well. Like we don't have a PTO, but we have a booster club that serves very similar to what a PTO does, and their outreach in the school. They're quite involved. We have the similar with each group, the clubs and things. I'm fortunate because I live in the community. That's one of the perks of being a principal. Like I live a mile from the school. I'm very ingrained in the community. My kids go to school there. We go to church there. We shop there. And so I know a lot of the community members. And so for better or for worse, like a lot of the parents of the school have my phone number, and I don't even know how they have it. Right. So, and I don't love them calling me on my personal cell phone number, but I'm okay. Like I see them constantly, and I try to make myself available to talk to anybody that wants to. And so I have lots of people. Often I go to the grocery store and I'll have a conversation with a parent about a concern or something great that's going on at the school. There's plenty of that as well. And people are positive, and they, for the most part, I think like the things that are happening with the school. Which is fortunate. So I think just making yourself available as an administrator is important. Taking the time when there is a concern to if it comes through an email, that you've reached out and you address that with people. Because as a principal, you get hundreds of emails a day, and so figuring out how to manage your time and all that and your priorities is important. But part of that has to be that community outreach and reaching out to parents. So those are the things I've done. Now that we've talked about this, I know there's more I need to be doing constantly. So I'd love for any feedback on what you've seen work, or what you would want from a principal. But it makes me sad that there's that was the biggest concern that you heard from a lot of parents, was their principals.
Yeah, I will say that and I understand, listen, you're an administrator, and then you're hearing that other parents around the state are struggling with some of their administrators, because you're a part of this group in Idaho, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're an administrator in Idaho. And I know that when I was a school board member and people would hear oh, I'm so frustrated with my school board member, my heart would hurt for them, because I'd think I wish that were having a better experience. Yeah. It's possible, right? Mm-hmm. It's possible. Oh, yeah. We all know that it's possible. And, yeah, I was just listening to another parent had a meeting just last night with a bunch of PTA parents who were receiving training. And one parent was talking about how this principal at their school was so rigid and just really kind of like a roadblock to parents as they were trying to, make some good things happen at their school. Yeah. And so what was great was when we get parents together like that and they're saying, listen, this is my experience. Another parent in the room said, you know what, this is what I've done with my administrator. I reached out to my administrator as the PTA president and said, how would you like to be communicated with? What, right? Asking that all along the way, so that really it was the parent, reaching out to create that level of partnership and understanding what those expectations were, because it was we, as this particular parent group was I want to be a resource for the school. That's kind of how they viewed themselves. Yeah. But it was interesting because one, kind of like systemically, when we look at why would this be an issue, right? Like, why are we having issues with administrators around the state? Because I think that we are having, issues with administrators. And there's, maybe like two different things from this thought. One, that, in a positive way, like, so if we're not looking at the issue, why would we be having good experiences? Like, right, why are there good experiences? And so you listed several things that, like, why are there probably good, more good experiences with you as an administrator or the type of administrator that you are in Middleton? And that, from my perspective, would be, well, one, you live in your community. That makes a difference, right? Like, you're in the community. Gosh, here in Idaho, we love that.
Yeah.
We want to, like, we like these communities where, like, these are our school communities, right? The community, they turn out on Friday night, Friday night lights, and we see the football team, the cheerleaders, the dance team, the marching band. The, community members who don't even have kids there, right? The student section, the opposing team, like, those are really cool things to see on a Friday night, right? And like, so many different people are so showcased. So, but not only that, but like, I mean, I was talking, I just went to my hometown in Oregon over the summertime, and it was fun because I was talking with my cousin who still lives there, and I told her that I got to tour the school. And that the reason I got to tour the school over the summer was because I'd reached out to my friend who's the administrator, and the administrator was my old junior year honors history teacher. Cool. Like, he started as a history teacher there, and then, was there for a long time doing that. And now he's the principal. And so I had wanted some like Astoria High School like merchandise. I didn't have any, and I was like, I really want my, So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll be there, on that day you're there. So we go to the school, he gives me this tour, and there have been 2 bonds that were passed by the time from when I ended high school, to 2024.
Right.
And so as we're touring the school, he was a part of that process of helping all of that money come in. Like, when I was a senior in high school, we helped pass the bond. Like, I was on student council, so we helped pass that bond.
Cool. Yeah.
So it was awesome. So, but like, walking around that school was really meaningful. And he was telling me about all these things that they've done. And so I go now and I'm talking to my cousin and I'm telling her, hey, I got to see the, high school. Wow, it looks so incredible. They've really made the campus like awesome and safe and really expanded like a lot of programs. And her words were, you know what? That principal has been so great for that high school because he's been there for 13 years now. And he has invested in that high school. Yeah. He has invested in the school and in the relationships and in the programs. He's a part of the community, right? Like, he lives there. His kids went through the school, all of those things. And I actually asked him, I was like, so you're going to become the superintendent, eventually? Because he could, he's great. Yeah. And he's like, I love what I do. I love being in this school. This is so meaningful in all the things that I'm doing. So I think that, like, just from my observation, when we can have administration that lives in the community or is near and invests in that community, right? Like, that makes a difference for our schools. But the other thing that I have observed is that, and this was something that one of these retired administrators spoke about, was that we have younger administrators now than before. She's like, there is a big gap between, the retired ones and more that are coming in. We don't have as many seasoned administrators. And because of that, she's like, we don't have they're not getting that mentorship. The young ones aren't getting the mentorship from the older ones, that lived experience. This is, how you address these things. And so if we have younger administrators, this is my thought process. We have younger administrators, and then who are our administrators? Where do we pull from? We pull from teachers, right? That's where they're coming from, generally speaking. Yep. And so we have teachers. Well, what are teachers most fearful of? Parents, So teachers are most fearful of parents, and they don't have the training to deal with parents. So now we're pulling from teachers who probably, had, challenging experiences with teachers, or parents didn't know how to deal with them. And now they're becoming administrators. So if they, and I'm going to say, you took an educational leadership course. I took, my master's was in adult organizational learning and leadership. And so, talking with people in this leadership role, well, it's not like these classes teach you how to interact with the public.
No, no.
That's not happening. And so what was interesting was like, I was talking to Superintendent Debbie Critchfield, and she was like, listen, we see this space in our bachelor education programs around the state where teachers are not like, they're content experts. They know their stuff, but they're not being prepared for, classroom management pieces, and then also interacting with parents. We need our teachers to be prepared to interact with parents so that they can do well in that classroom, intersection with parents, and then so they can do well as administrators. And like, that's something that like her administration is going to be, addressing. And I'm really excited because I'm going to be meeting with her about that. But that's where, for me, like, that's where I feel like it starts. Like, and if we don't have, some people like are intuitively saying, hey, I know I need to engage with parents. Hey, I know it's going to be hard. But this impacts our school culture, right? Like you, or, we have plenty of administrators that are doing that. But if we don't have administrators that know how to do it or don't know how to address the culture, then we end up with the scenarios I feel like we have where parents are saying around the state, administrators are my number one problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that sparks a couple thoughts. So hopefully this tracks what you're thinking. And this is something this is kind of just it's always something that's irked me about people in leadership positions, but that disposition to have no as your default, like a parent group comes to you with an idea. No, it's like, no, that's not what I was thinking. So we're not doing that. And that's something I've really tried to avoid because I couldn't stand, like, it goes back to when I was a student council advisor. I had all these big ideas as a pretty young teacher, these big ideas, and I was get these kids and I would be excited about something and present it. And it's like, no, you can't do that. It's like, really? Like, I think we could. I think it's just laziness maybe on your part or whatever. And now that I'm in that role, I have a bit more perspective on maybe why that would be no, because you worry about litigation or the safety of something. But I just think it's so important as leaders to just look for opportunities to say yes. And because the more times you say no, that just kind of dampens people's spirits. And, a parent group comes to you with an idea and you say no enough times and they just stop coming with those ideas because they just know it's like, it's not worth my energy. Right. So, and I don't know how you change that about people. It almost seems like it's ingrained in certain people, or maybe they've been burned by some, maybe they had a bad experience, but gosh, if I could just like tell like leaders one thing, it's like, just look for opportunities to say yes to things, or even if you can't do it at first, just like, okay, maybe, but let's figure out how to make this happen, whatever it is. So that was just something that came to my mind as you were talking. There was something else, and I want to make sure I articulate this right. I've kind of lost it. So it must not have been that important. So,
okay, maybe it'll come to you.
It may come back to me.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because like there are some really great leadership programs that, administrators can bring in, right? And they can learn on their own. And one of the ones I'm doing right now, so like I'm president of Idaho PTA, and I want all the people on my state board to be good leaders. Like it's leadership development, right? Like there's so many things that if we're not intentionally working on it, nothing's happening.
Yep.
So like one of the things that we're doing this year are that like I brought in the Brene Brown Dare to Lead, right? So reading the book and then going through the workbook. And it's so interesting to me because I think sometimes and I don't know if you've experienced this, but like you just kind of live in the world of knowing the things that you know. And so then sometimes I make the bad assumption that other people it just isn't like they know this knowledge too. So why would I say it, right? Like they're in these roles and it's like, that's not true.
No, you should say it. Yeah.
You definitely should like say it. Like say the thing that you want to say. And if someone else like is like, "Whoa, that's good," or "Oh, I was thinking about that too," or "Oh, I hadn't thought about that before," right? Or like, "Oh, I totally knew that," right? Like it's fine, right? People can say all the things.
Yeah.
So it was interesting because like we just started this. It's like going really well, and one of my board members says like, "This is changing my life," and I was like, "Whoa! I hadn't anticipated that." Like I love her work and I'm so familiar with it, but so many people aren't.
Yeah.
And I just think like I like her work in particular because it helps people understand what it really, from her perspective, what it means to be like a courageous leader, right? And putting yourself out there. And that's that's hard. It takes courage.
It does.
For a principal to interact with parents.
Yeah.
It does, because you don't know what you're going to get.
Right. Yeah.
And so, how do you then, as a principal in a school, how do you address the culture like within your school? I know that you talked about, which I like totally loved,
Mhm.
you're engaging with your, you're addressing like this, your sports thing, and you're intentionally engaging with parents and working to address this thing like, hey, this is like a problem.
Mhm.
Let's fix this problem. And let's bring a lot of people to the table,
Yeah.
right, to fix this problem so that we can create this really great thing. And look, there's going to be conflict because anytime you bring adults to the table, there's going to be
Mhm.
conflict. Conflict isn't bad,
No.
right? Like it just means we have different perspectives and we can work through that respectfully
Yes.
to create this really beautiful thing. So, how do you then as a principal, like you come to the school, or any principal in general, like how do you address culture? What does culture look like
Mhm.
to you and how do you
Mhm.
address it?
Okay, so I'll explain how I've done it coming in as a new principal. And I don't know if this is the best way to do it. It seems like it's working so far.
Yeah.
But you may ask, like a kid at my school, and they might, oh, that guy's a dork and whatever. This is stupid. But I at least it seems to be working for our staff. We get survey data back from, like, we take really seriously this parent engagement survey that we give, and a student engagement and a staff engagement survey. Like, we have goals centered around that specifically, and I can go into further detail
So wait a
later about that.
second. Are you talking, is this like a district wide thing or just you as the principal, you're sending out these
It's a
engagements?
district-wide thing because, and I'm very fortunate. I have a superintendent, Mark Gee, who's just phenomenal. Like, when you talk about like having mentors for young administrators, which I'm on the younger side for most principals, he's just been phenomenal to work with, and our assistant superintendent as well. I couldn't ask for better mentors in that regard. And I had great mentors at Eagle as well, by the way. I feel bad like if I shout somebody out, that I don't shout somebody else. Like
No,
Susan
you're good.
McInerney was great. I had awesome mentors here in West Ada too, but working with Dr. Gee in Middleton has just been great, and he's really helped me develop as a leader. So anyway, our district does those, but we take the data really seriously, and so we as a school personally have like taken it upon ourselves. Like, are you familiar with oh gosh, now the acronym went out of my mind. It's kind of there's an industry standard that they use for these engagement surveys. So it's not just an education one. It's what's the score? There's a score, something something score. Anyway, it'll come to me in just a second here.
Okay.
Anyway, so we have essentially what we do. We have a bunch of survey questions that we ask, like, rank from, or like, do you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, right? And we'll ask a bunch of questions like, students at my school respect each other, right? That's one of the questions, right? And it stands out because that's one that we're really trying to work on, because it's one that was one of our lower ones.
Mhm.
So, but anyway, but before that survey even starts, the very first question in all these surveys is, would I recommend this school to a friend or colleague, or friend, or the wording, something like that. And then it's rated on a 1 through 10 scale. 10 meaning you'd recommend it, no reservations at all. 1 meaning you wouldn't recommend it to your worst enemy, right? So that's a data point that we use, and and to get a positive score in that is a big deal, because they only count the positives. If you score a 10, 9, or 8 on that one, that's counted positive for you. A 7 or a 6 is just like a neutral, and 5 or less is negative. They are detractors, essentially. So our goal is to have a plus, be positive. Plus 40 is considered like incredible. Anything in the positive is really good, though. So that's one that we like pay really close attention to each year, and we have goals that are centered around that. And I'm sorry, I didn't explain that super well, but yeah. So that's, we look at that data, and it's really important to us to figure out, like, are we actually engaging our community? So anyway, so we set our goals around that. So I came in as a new principal, knowing Middleton pretty well because I taught there just 3 years before, lived in the community, so I was aware what was going on. There's tons of good things going in. So I knew coming in as a new principal, I'm not going to just revamp everything about the school. But one thing I did do was I talked to a lot of community members coming into it, parents, students, and I talked to every staff member at the school, like sat with them. That was when I was still working at Eagle. I'd leave Eagle, go there because they're on longer school days because it's a 4-day week over there. And then I'd talk to everybody and just have these, like I said, all these meetings. I met with over 100 20 or so people. Just they had to be fairly short meetings because that's a lot of people to talk to. But and I had just a set of questions. I asked everybody, what are things you love about the school? What are things you would change? Anything I should know about you or the school? And it led to really good conversations. And I got a lot of good data, took notes. I still refer to some of that. So I had to do some fact finding on my own though, and to really talk to people. That was super important. So, and even just that act alone, I felt like helped our culture, because I knew that coming in cared about people's opinions and wanted to hear from them. So I think that was important, that they knew like, okay, the leader of this school is not just coming in to put his stamp on the school, which I definitely have in my own way, but I also am considering everybody that's involved with this as well. And I talked to a lot of students too. It was a lot of work, but it was probably the best thing I did coming into the school. So anyway, from there, I wanted to develop a leadership team for the school. So because one of the things that feedback I got is that teachers feel like they didn't have a voice in decisions of the school. So I got a leadership team with, department heads of the school. And this is a big deal to me, is I think every school has like just really stellar teachers, no matter where you are. And your decisions as a principal should more, if you're doing something surrounding the school, you should go to those really stellar teachers and get their advice on it, because they're going to have what's best for kids in mind, because there's a reason that they're those stellar teachers. And it's not just that they're content experts. They connect with students. They can communicate with parents. They're not self-motivated. They're selfless, right? And so I tried to gather that group together so I would have this really solid leadership team. I made a big deal about having a really huge and robust student council and getting really close with those students, because and made it a point of emphasis, like, you're in this position here because you are to represent your school. Like, you are their representative. So you have to, again, put aside as a leader, you have to put aside maybe your wants and your desires at times for the desires of your school. So we developed that and really tried to make that a robust group as well. And I'm really proud of our student council, and we have some really excellent advisors with that, and the kids are just doing really neat things. So I made a point to really emphasize those groups. Now that I'm thinking of it, though, I should have brought more parents in, right?
I am not here to criticize Johnny.
No. I'm just reflecting in real time here. So anyway, that was really important. So then we started to make some decisions, and this is something that I brought over as just like my own thing, because I'm by nature a very competitive person. I cared very, very deeply about Middleton High School. My kids are going to go there. I care deeply about any school I work at. Like when I was at Eagle, like I wanted Eagle to be the very best, because it's just kind of how I feel as a person. Like if I'm going to work here, I just want it to be, I want to work at the best school in Idaho, right? Yeah. And I brought that same perspective to Middleton. And in fact, that's like our major goal as a school. And I say it all the time. We say it in every staff meeting. I say it to students all the time. And I send it out to parents in all my newsletters. Like, our big goal is to be the best high school in the state of Idaho. And I wouldn't say that if I didn't think it was possible. I think Middleton is amongst those schools that could be the best. Because I think there's times where just the nature of public schools, if you look at like test scores, for example, the schools that score the very best in the state of Idaho, there is a strong correlation between high test scores and their socioeconomic status of those schools, right?
I'm so glad that you said that. Thank you for saying it out loud. Because not enough people say that out loud.
Yeah, Eagle does really well, and there's great teachers at Eagle, but also they test really well because the high socioeconomic status, because those parents value education, and they've worked hard themselves to get to the point where they're at.
And they can support their kids.
Exactly. Yeah.
In that process.
Yeah, all those resources matter, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but Middleton, I think, is one of those schools that could have amongst the highest test scores in the state, and could be considered. And again, that's to call yourself the best high school in the state. Like, how are you judging that? Like, what's the criteria, right? But we have developed our criteria. Like, we feel like if we can do this and this and this and this, and I can go over that, this would make us the best school in the state. Test scores is part of that, just because it's one thing that you can compare to other schools. It's just one thing, though. It's not the most important thing. But we know that, actually the ISAT gets a bad rap. But if you actually take the ISAT and look at it, if you can do well on the eyesight, you're probably going to do pretty well in college, right? Which isn't the biggest deal in the world. Like kids do lots of things. And I love that we've, as a state, pushed more than just college on kids. There's lots of other technical schools or apprenticeships or just military or career in other ways. Like, and we're
like,
big on that in Middleton too.
Well, it's like college and career readiness, because even after college, you're going to have a career. So we should just make sure that you're college and career ready when you're coming out of high school.
Yeah. And that's a huge point of emphasis for us too. So anyway, we have this big overarching goal that and again, this was set with me, and I feel like as a leader, sometimes I just have to say like these sorts of things like, hey, this is a big deal to us. And we've pushed that out to our community and our parents and our students and our kids will even joke with me all the time. Like they'll come to me like, hey, we need to do this thing, Mr. Hullinger. And if we do, it will make us the best. It will help for us to be the best school in the state. And my staff does that. It's like almost come back to bite me sometimes, because like people will bring things to me and they'll use that like, hey, if we're going to be the best school in the state, we need to do this. Yeah. And sometimes I'm like, well, I don't know if that'll actually, but I appreciate that they've kind of embraced that, because truly, like, I want us to be the best school in the state, and I think we can. And so it's something we talk about always. And so that's been a big part of our culture, because I think it's important for our students and our community to have this sense of pride in our school. And I see that in Middleton. Like if you come to Middleton, so I'll give an example, and this is around football, but I love football for lots of reasons, but not just because I like the sport of football. I love that it's a chance for the band to showcase what they're doing, for the cheer, for the dance team, for the student section to showcase what they're doing, because that's a big deal I think for young kids to come together and they're off their phones and they're shoulder to shoulder and they're screaming at the top of their lungs and they're being creative and they're being funny and they're interacting. Like that matters to me. So like I think you can like measure the healthiness of a school by just like how many kids show up in this student section. And they may not care about football at all, but it's fun for them to be together. That's a huge deal to me. I'm real passionate about that. So the first football game we had this year, it got home. We haven't had a true home football game at Middleton. In fact, tonight is. I'm so excited. Like it's going to be, we're super excited. And
it should be noted that this is not going to air in September, but he's talking September. What are we?
So we're September 27th.
There we go. Okay.
So we were supposed to have one like 3 weeks ago, but it got smoked out.
Yes, all the fires. Oh my gosh.
So we had to travel to Fruitland, which it's not that far away, but it's like 35, 40 minutes away from Middleton.
It's a drive.
So we went there and our community just came over. Like we filled the stands like to overflowing. It was filled over. And I was just so impressed with our community that they just showed up to support and to be together as a community. I love the community of Middleton. There's so many perks to being in Middleton, because I don't think so. This is not a dig at West Ada. If I was a principal of a West Ada high school right now, I don't think I could push being the best high school in the state of Idaho, because you have 7 other high schools within the district. And if I'm at Eagle High School and saying this, well, what about Centennial High School? Like they need the same resources. There needs to be some equity, which is fair in a district. Like the district can't pour all their resources into one high school and make it, better than the others. They have to spread that out. Now, at Middleton, we have one high school. We have one traditional high school and one alternative school. And we're a bit more nimble. Like if there's a program we want to take on, I don't have to wait to see if like down the road Caldwell High School wants to do it as well. It doesn't matter. Like we're going to do it. If we feel like it's best for students, we can do that. So there's some perks to being at Middleton. Also, we're on a 4-day school week, which we get better teachers because teachers love that, the work-life balance of that. So this is also a plug. If you're a great teacher, come teach at Middleton, because we're going to be the best high school in the state of Idaho, and we're on a 4-day week. So come to Middleton.
Oh my gosh, I love what you're saying. Keep going, because I have something to say.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that you're saying is that like this is a benefit of being a smaller district. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, air quotes around a smaller district, right? Because gosh, I know a lot of districts around the state look at the legislature and they say, stop making laws based on West Ada and Boise. Mm-hmm. We're really frustrated with that, right? Yeah. Like we're these small rural areas. And there is a perk to being a smaller district, mm-hmm. right? There are some benefits. And you're talking about one of the benefits where you're like, we have one high school and like, these are the things we focus on and we bring our community together. Mm-hmm. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I think it should be celebrated. And that's what I'm hearing you say is like, listen, we're going to celebrate that. We're not going to shy away from it. And I think that's really awesome. Yeah. Like, bravo to you.
I love our district. I love what we get to do. And I mean, I'm sure there's drawbacks. There's probably when you have, like, I was an econ teacher, so there's kind of economies of scale, like you can use your money a bit more efficiently. And so that would be nice. And so West Ada has some advantages that way. But I mean, every school has their advantages and disadvantages, right? So anyway, so we have this big overarching goal, and then we've set, goals to help us achieve that goal. So like, and some of those are long-term goals, and some of those are goals for each year. And we publish those out to our staff. So our staff is very aware. Like I said, every newsletter I send out to the community and parents, like that, we tried to format it really nicely so it looks good and they can see, like, okay, we know we want to do this. Like, one of our goals this year is to win the Schools of Excellence Award for the 5A classification. Like, that's something that we want to do. Eagle wins this pretty much every year at the 6A level. So we won't be competing against Eagle because we're just slightly smaller for 2 years, and then we'll be at Eagle's classification because we're growing so much. Yeah, that's something, like, that's a goal. And that's not just a goal for our students, that's a goal for our community. Because if our community doesn't behave at these events and things that we go to, then we get docked as a school. So I can go to the community and say, hey, I need us to behave, appropriately and be supportive, because this is not just a school award. This is a Middleton community award that we can win together. So we have, these various goals. Like, one of our goals is, I remember the name of that score. It's called the Net Promoter Score, by the way. So I assume if you're like listening to this and you're into business and things, you're probably aware of a Net Promoter Score. So one of our goals is that our Net Promoter Score with our students is I wanted to get to positive 40. 2 years ago, before I started, and this is not bragging about, I don't think this is me, this is my staff, but 2 years ago, before I came, it was at a negative 33. And that's just, again, it's hard to actually get in the positive because it's such a strict standard to be a positive. So we were back at that this year. So this last year, when we asked them again, we were at a negative 5, I think. And we were very disappointed because we were like, we're going to get in the positive. In fact, our big goal was positive 40. So we were excited about the growth, but there was still in the negative. So, okay, we've got to get it to the positive, and we have lots of things we're trying to do to get that way. But our Net Promoter Score moved with our parents, like, and it's like plus 33 or something like that. So that was phenomenal. It's like, okay, our parents are feeling good about our school, but we're still wanting to push it in the 40s. Our staff feels really good about our school. Our Net Promoter Score was, like upper 40s or something, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's one of our goals, is like these Net Promoter Scores. We want to push them to this 40 range. So just, I guess the point of that is we want to change the culture by promoting these goals that we have that are going to help us. These are the kind of the building blocks to make us the best school in the state of Idaho. So that's a culture change thing that I feel like has been positive, is just having a common objective. And it's one that I think everybody can get behind. It's like, gosh, if I'm a parent at Middleton, I want my kid to go to the best high school in the state of Idaho. Like, who wouldn't want that, right? And it's not just, and part of our goals is that also identifies like what actually would make you the best school in the state of Idaho. It's not just academic success, athletic success, activity success. Like, it's the feel of students. Like, do they like being at school? Are they proud of being at that school? That's where that Net Promoter Score comes in. Another one that I think our community has really rallied behind and our staff has rallied behind is we have a goal of every student at our school is involved in something that's not just going to class. So they're involved in the club or the band, and in a club. Like, we have a Star Wars club, so they're part of Star Wars club. Good, check that box. You're involved in something, band, choir, some sort of sport, something like that. Because there's many reasons. There's lots of research around if they have this other connection, and hopefully they have many connections, but if at least one, they're going to do better academically as well. And their mental health is going to be better. They're going to have a better high school experience overall if they have these other things that connect them to the school. And I'm super passionate about that. And so we had a big push last year. Hey, we need to really expand our clubs. So our staff got on board, our community got on board, because we need adult advisors for this. So we added 25 new clubs last year, just because we realized, hey, our kids need more of these opportunities. And so we had community members that took that role on, staff members. Our school board was super supportive of it. And so they were constantly approving clubs last year, because there's a process where they have to approve it. And so now we have all these cool clubs that kids can be a part of. And so that inches us closer to that goal of these kids are connected to something else.
Oh my gosh, you guys are doing the coolest stuff in Middleton. I just like love it. Got me all excited over
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
This is awesome. I love it.
yeah. It's yeah. I love that. I love that town. I'm so happy with these things that we get to do. Now, are we perfect? No. There's lots of bumps along the way. And me as a brand new principal, there's things that you know, I'm trying to think of the word, fumble the bag, whatever. I mess things up all the time.
Sure, you're learning.
Yeah, for sure. Well, people have been patient with me and supportive, and I'm really grateful for our community as a whole, our staff as a whole, our students have embraced it. So yeah, those things I think are big culture things. The one other thing I would add, and this is another thing I kind of alluded to it like with the football game. I think that's important to me that kids all come together. Like I love when like we have like a ton of kids at a dance or at a concert or whatever. I think as schools we have to be more intentional, inventing words now, intentional about getting kids together in those sorts of, in those situations where they're not on their phones, but not just honestly not at home. This is going to sound funny. I think we've made our homes too comfortable and too pleasant of places for our kids to be these days.
Ooh, tell me more.
I think homes are great. Like, and I, especially like we were talking before, like you had all these kids over to your house. Like those are the things I love, that sort of thing. But you can, as a kid now, you can stay at home and not interact with anybody else and have a pretty like enjoyable, well, quote unquote, enjoyable life where you have all the entertainment options you need, right? We have Netflix and all these streaming services. You have your phone. So I'm guilty of this sometimes too. I'll be like scrolling Twitter while we have a show going on. It's like, do I need two screens right now? And I'll like have my laptop open responding to emails for work. So it's like, yeah. I'm guilty of this as anybody, but like our homes are so comfortable now because, I'm just thinking when I was growing up, I always wanted to be out of the house, not because I didn't have a pleasant home. I was like the oldest of 8 kids. Maybe that was why, but
it could be.
Yeah. But my friends were the same way. It's like, we wanted to be out and like together. Like it was just like, it was Weiser, Idaho. We didn't have a lot to do, but we hung out, right? We weren't. And so I just worry like as part of like this mental health crisis with kids, they're not getting together as much as they used to. Right. And I honestly think part of it is just like, it's really nice to be home, like it's a good place to be because in credit to parents, like you want your home to be a comfortable place, but I'm not saying we shouldn't make our homes comfortable. So we as schools though have to be way more intentional about making these environments that we have this competing place that's the home where kids can just, interact, like, be on their phones, or they have Wi-Fi, they have streaming services, they have good food. Like we have to provide all that. We compete with that and have to provide something more appealing to them to get them together. Whereas before, I feel like it's like, okay, everybody's going to come to this whatever game, I think you see less kids just showing up for those things unless you make it a big deal. So we have to make like larger events out of things just to get kids to come, and we have to market it well, and we have to make it a high quality production if it's, choir or band or something like that. So for example, and you know these people in Middleton, the Stykes, there was a kid there named Caleb last year, their son. He graduated, but he made this event, and it's called Pianos Live with a community member. And it was so cool. And they asked me to be involved. I got to be the MC, but they got all these kids to come and do this, like, it was like a piano competition at the school. And we had a ton of community members come, and these kids got to show off their piano skills. And it wasn't just like your typical, like, I think the way they market it is like, it's not your grandma's piano recital or something like that. And it was so good. And all these kids from the school who I didn't realize were so talented came, and they had a piano competition, and they had a panel of their judges who weren't, the kids that were the judges weren't like piano players themselves. It had to be entertaining too. It couldn't just be like obviously some kids are better at piano and they could just play like some classical piece that's obviously very technical and amazing, but it also had to be entertaining. So it was a really neat show, and a ton of people showed up, even kids from the school came. So that was one of those things, is like, yes, but it was a ton of work to do it. Right. Mm-hmm. So things like that, you kind of have to do. And in some ways it's unfortunate, because it used to be like kids will just show up for anything. You put something on at the school and they'll show up. And now we have to produce it and make it a big deal. Yeah, sorry. So those are the culture things I think you have to do, and part of it is being just intentional. about it?
Well, I mean, you're talking about so many things, right? Like you come, you see a thing as a leader, and you're like, oh my gosh, let's get together with my team. Let's set some goals. Let's create some objectives for us. And then let's bring in the people who are the other leaders to bring in, all the other, so we're getting all the layers of it, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking about like teachers, students, parents, and the community. Like that's like something that's like really beautiful. Gosh, you should feel so proud of that. I really admire like the work that you're doing over there with all, and like to your point, the people are already there.
Oh yeah.
There are incredible people there, right? But we can have incredible people, but they don't know how to come together.
Yeah.
We need the connector, the leader right there to bring these people together. And there's a bunch of parents actually over in Boise. I just recently connected with them, and they found this slogan on the internet somewhere, and they want to bring it to their community, and they want to spread it around the state. And I was like, I will help you spread it around the state. Not that I think that I'm like so special, but I just talk to a lot of people.
You have a platform, yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, so it's the slogan of more social, less media in our school communities.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That's a great slogan.
I will say I added school communities. It just says communities, but because it's the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast, I'm going to say school communities.
No, I can embrace that.
But like it is, I think that that's what we need. More social, less media in our school communities. Full stop.
Yep.
And that's like what you're describing in Middleton, like what you're doing. I'm like, let me give you a flyer so you can like put it up around your school.
Yeah.
Johnny, let's figure out how to get this in Middleton.
For sure.
Because that's what we need in our school communities. And like, I mean, I remember when I was a kid and I loved going to school dances, and I loved going to, I would go to church dances too. And as my husband affectionately calls them, teen dances. I'm like, stop calling it that. That's terrible. He still calls them teen dances. And my kid, we all just kind of like cringe at him. Like, anyways, it's kind of funny. But it's interesting now because like dances have shifted, and my kids like for their school, they're like, well, they're not big fans of the dances because it's all fast songs and they're like mosh pit.
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, we'd like some slow songs. We'd like some other things. Right. And so like for anyone who's putting on a dance, can you please put on some good slow songs so these kids can dance together? Because that's an important part of like being social.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you actually have to talk to the person.
Yeah.
Slow dancing.
And like, come on, like if you're like you want to dance with like someone, like a slow dance, like lets you do that,
Yeah.
So there, I think there's like some things that like we've like culturally moved away from, and like we need to as adults like reintroduce some of those really great things to kids, because to your point, these kids, like, they want to be social.
Yes.
They crave it. We all need that connection with other people. But as a society, because of the progression of all the things that we have at the tip of our fingertips, we've made it too easy to be at home and not be social. And like, I can appreciate that some people, I'm not talking about the, some people who need to be at home because, they've got social anxiety. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact is we need to create great spaces for our kids to be so they can be more social and on less media.
Yes.
Right? Because, we were talking before the recording that like, gosh, you've read the book, The Anxious Generation. I've read it. I keep telling people about it. I was talking to a senator this morning about that book, and I'd seen him like last week, and he was like, oh, Alexis, that was the book you told me about. I'm like, yeah, read it.
Yeah, it's a big deal right now.
Like if you're going to like, he's a senator like who's working on some technology bills, and Idaho PTA is supporting a technology bill, a couple of them. And they this book, The Anxious Generation, really deals with this, like grapples with this concept that like we have had this decline of play-based childhood, which like means less social, and a rise of a phone-based childhood. And that is brought with it its own challenges. And I heard someone recently say like, well, we want kids to have a human experience, but what we have created is a human experiment with these cell phones.
Yep.
And we need to, as adults, like we need to do what's right for our kids, like do what's best for them. And it's not, being on social media and on our phones all the time. That's not a human experience. We want our kids to have a human experience.
Yeah. Do you ever get the feeling that like in 50 years we'll look back on this time, or and say, and kind of like we look back on like cigarettes, like because I don't know exactly what it was like in the 30s or 40s, but a lot of people smoke cigarettes and it's just kind of part of daily life, even really young people. It's like, oh yeah, cigarettes, whatever. I worry that in 50 years we'll look back and be like, oh my gosh, those Americans were giving their kids cell phones at age 10 and just giving them access to those. Like, how damaging for them. How would they do that? I just wonder. I don't know if that'll actually be the case, but
I
I
I
worry about that.
I do think that now we know we're starting to see just like cigarettes, except I would argue that like cigarettes have like no beneficial value whatsoever,
Hmm.
right? Like you and I both know
They
that,
look
right?
cool, but no, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding.
But there's no benefit. Like, I
Right.
mean, there's no benefit to smoking a cigarette, and Big
Hmm.
Tobacco can come after me for saying it. Like, there's no
No,
benefit
there's
for
not.
smoking.
Yeah,
But we do know that like there's benefits to technology, right? So
sure.
that's the line. But I
Makes it
have
even more dangerous
it
because
where
you want those benefits, but where is that line?
where
Yeah.
is the line? Like to your point, I've used that analogy like with people. And
Mhm.
so I agree with the analogy. And the idea is that, like, yeah, I do think that we are now starting. There are parents, there are, different people in different like categories who are saying this is harmful for our kids.
Mhm.
We see that we're acknowledging, we're recognizing problems in a way that we couldn't see them, 10, 15 years ago. But now we're seeing them. Now we have data that supports, as if we always have to have data. Why
Yeah.
can't we go off intuitive feelings sometimes too? Like, come on, we can know that something's bad. I don't need the data to tell
Yeah.
me that,
Yeah.
right? But that we have the data to support and show that, gosh, there's a rise in mental health. We know that it's like, connected to being on the cell phone and social media and those different things. And which is why now we have a lot of parents who are making a push for, we want phone-free schools,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And all these different things. What's Middleton doing to address those things? Do you guys have a policy yet?
Yeah, no, it's our handbook this is basically in our handbook already, but it was just more of a point of emphasis as I came in as the principal. Is just there's no phones during instructional time, and for us, instructional time is sorry, I have my schedule right here. So first period goes from 7:45 to 8:45. There's just no phones out during that time. So even we meet with all our students like in their English classes, so we can talk to all the students as principals in the first few days. And I brought the examples like, okay, so if your teacher says class is done, because you've subbed, like sometimes there's downtime in high schools, right? We don't like there to be a ton. We like the kids to be actively engaged, but sometimes it's just natural, right? So I give them the example. So your teacher finishes class 5 minutes early, says, hey, you know what? You can do whatever you want right now. We have a bit of time because we finished a bit early till the bell rings. Can you take your cell phones out then? And you say, yeah, that should be a fine time. I say, nope. We can't do that. You can talk to a friend. You can read a book. I give them a list of things they can do, but pulling the cell phone out is not one of those things. And to our staff, and that was a tough shift to make. I would be supportive of us just completely shutting it down, but the logistics of doing that, it's a lot to just like not have them all at the school, and we may get some community pushback because there are safety issues around. Some parents feel there's safety issues around their kid not having their phone in their bag at least, so they can reach out to them, which I understand. I don't know if we'll ever necessarily overcome that, but yeah. So with us, it's just that from bell to bell, essentially, anytime that class is in session, there are to be no phones out.
Okay.
So yeah, so they can have them like during lunchtime. We have really short passing periods, like the 4 minutes of passing period. I suppose if you want to shoot off a text, go for it. But in class time, no, we don't allow it. And our staff, to their credit, like I said, has been really good about implementing that. And occasionally I'll see it because I like to be in classrooms a lot. I'll see it in fact, I've maybe seen it once this year in a classroom I've been in. I know it still happens. Kids are sneaky, but our teachers are doing a good job of cracking down on it. And kids, because we were making the shift, and I reached out to parents about it. And actually, there's this like enormous Google Doc with it's from Jonathan Haidt, and a lot of collaborators. And it has like just all the research behind why students shouldn't have it. So we put a document together with some research, but then just shared that with all the parents as well. Like, hey, this is why we're doing this, and I had overwhelming support from parents on it. They're like, yes, thank you. I had one parent even say, like, I could kiss your feet. I'm so grateful that you're doing this. It's like, oh gosh, like it's not that big a deal, but they are super supportive. Most students were supportive of it as well. And that was what surprised me, is just how on board they were. It's like, yeah, you know what? I don't need a phone out. I did have one girl who said, to be honest, this is really stupid, but it was fine. She and I got along fine. But she was just sharing her opinion on that. So
Yeah.
but students for the most part are even on board with it, which is I'm happy about that.
Well, and to the idea that like when we create spaces where kids don't need their phones, right? Then for them, it's like there's like a new documentary that's like come out, I think like on FX or something like that. And it talks about, I think it's called Social Studies. I haven't watched it yet, so I'm not recommending it, but I'm just saying there's something out there on it. And like they're asking teenagers, like, do you even like want a cell phone? Like, do you feel like you have to have it? And they're like, listen, we don't think that it's that great, but if we don't have it, we are missing out.
Miss out. Yeah.
They're missing out on these social experiences. And like that's, you know, as like a 40-something-year-old, like I don't care about stuff like that for me, but I can totally appreciate that a 16-year-old feels like I'm missing out on a social experience. I can appreciate that. Now, does that mean that I'm going to let my kid be on all certain apps? No, because I'm the parent. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right? It's good for me to hold those lines. But there is something inherent about wanting to be included in the things, right? For kids. And like, so you can totally appreciate. So I think it's great, like when schools have these policies and it's just like a blanket thing. And my kid at the middle school, they've always had this no cell phone out policy. Like, so we, you know, like she has like this pinwheel phone that she takes and it's in her backpack and it stays in her locker and they are not allowed to pull that thing out at all. Right. And then, so she has it then she can have it at the end of the day. And it's mostly just like for safety, right? Like she's got that in her backpack for that reason. But at the high school, it's a totally different policy. And my kids are noticing they're liking the benefit of like the phone being away. They want to be in the classroom. Gosh, if a kid has to be there, right? We want our kids to be at school. They're supposed to be at school till the age of 16 technically, right? And so by law, but we don't want teenagers to know that. So that they want, if they're going to be there, they have to be there. Like they want it to be a good experience. They don't like, who wants to just sit around for 7.5, 8 hours and like be totally bored? No one does. So if the phones are removed from the classroom, then it's a great opportunity for people to be engaged in a way that they haven't experienced yet. You and I have experienced that. We went to school with no cell phones. I mean, I'm younger than you. And like, I went to school and I remember we had a phone and it stayed in the car. Like it was for emergencies if we got in a car accident, which I had to use on more than one occasion, like to call my dad, like, oh God, like this, you know, that's where the cell phone lived, was in the car. We didn't have cell phones in school. And so like, it wasn't a distraction for us. And yeah, there are some things to be said for, I mean, I remember hearing things that my parents experienced that maybe were, you know, different than when I was going to high school in the 90s, right? Decades are going to change, but I think the social experience needs to be protected, right? In a way, and we're the adults that, like, parents are the adults in the room that need to do that protecting. And we need to have policies in place that are supported by our administration, right? That support teachers for creating these spaces where kids can learn, they can be social, and they can have a good time while being at school.
Yeah, I'm if we're talking about like parents banding together, this is one of those things where if we could just get, because my kids are like 10 and younger, right? So they haven't even really wanted a phone yet, but we've told them like, hey, sorry, you're not going to have a smartphone probably ever when you live under our roof, but we'll see. But my wife and I, our big concern is like, what about their friends? Because I don't want our kids to be these, you know, to miss out. I don't want them to be isolated and never get to do things with other kids just because they don't have a smartphone. Is that gonna affect them? But so our hope is that, and we've talked to, you know, other parents in our community about it. Just, man, it'd be great though if we all just like committed to, hey, no smartphones for our kids till they're 16, you know, no social media till they're 18, whatever those numbers are. But if we were all on the same page, it would just make it so much easier to be able to do that, because we know it's healthy. Like we already know it's better for our kids. You can't deny that. But it's also unhealthy for kids to not be able to get together and connect, right? So, and there's ways around it without smartphones. But if the smartphone is the only option to do it, then that's what kids are going to use, right? So, I don't know. That's just it's something I care about. But I've never been as a high school principal, I haven't really been able to use my platform of like, hey, and you have to be careful also in education to like tell people how to parent, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't ever want to come across that way of like, hey, you should be doing this, and because I don't necessarily know better than them. I haven't raised a teenager yet, right? So, and even if I had raised a teenager, it's going to be much different. Teenagers are all different than each other, right? So, and schools we need to be careful in schools of like thinking we know best about what kids should do. We have one perspective on it, but the parent has another perspective, and that's incredibly valuable as well. In fact, a parent's perspective is more important about their kids than the high school principal's perspective on a kid, right? So we're a team though. And so anyway, I forgot even what the point I was trying to make there, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I just was on social media before this recording, before our conversation. And as I was like, because I posted something on Instagram and I like posted my thing and then I was just like waiting for it to upload. So I just was like scrolling. And there was a thing because like, there's some national things going on. It's called COSA, like Kids Online Safety Act.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, a lot of parents around the nation are trying to get their national, lawmakers to support this bill. And, and now because of this noise, which is like good noise,
Yeah.
like app developers are, developing some different things. They can integrate safety stuff. They just aren't doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the full stop there.
Yeah.
And so, but it was interesting because like, as I was scrolling, I saw this one, it was like, an ad. So it was for like a famous pediatrician online who was like, hey, Instagram has made some great changes and now they have a teenage version of Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, look, my kids, and this was the thing that got me because I'm like, listen, like I get that you're a parent, you can do whatever I'm not going to tell you can't do that. But first of all, now you're using your pediatrician platform where you're like not a social media expert. Like that's not what they train you in medical school. Right. I can guarantee that. And then she says, now, now my 13-year-old is safe. She's using these words, safe to go on Instagram because they have a teenage platform because my 13-year-old, she wants to be able to explore the things that she's interested in, mm-hmm. right? And then I'm just like, I'm listening to this and now I'm going through and like looking at the comments. Well, what are people saying, right? And she has the expectation like, listen, don't be mean, So people are like, oh, I love you, Dr. So-and-so. I don't even know who this woman is. Like that's the first time it popped up. So I love you, Dr. So-and-so. And like, this is so incredible. And yeah, like Instagram is so great. And I could not help myself. And so I was like, yeah, I agree that it's good that we make social media safer for teenagers who want to engage in it. But to think that a teenager is going to be safe on Instagram at the age of 13 isn't where my brain goes.
Yeah.
And I think that teenagers can, like a 13-year-old can engage in her interests off of social media.
Absolutely.
We don't need social media for our teenagers to engage in their interests. We can, in our school communities, create great opportunities right where they are, mm-hmm. where you're like your example, like where you created like, dozens of new clubs mm-hmm. for these kids because you want them to have something that they're interested in and engaged in other than just sitting in their classroom seat. Yep. We can meet kids right where they are, and we don't need social media to do that. Mm-hmm. We've done it for hundreds of years without social media, and we can keep helping fill their brains with great things so they can be social off of the phone.
Right. Yeah. It almost reminds me of, we see a little bit less of this, but we've still seen it some, the different type of vapes you see, where it's like we saw, there was one I confiscated one year. This was a few years ago, and it looked exactly like, do you remember the iPod Nano?
Oh yes.
Yeah, it didn't have a screen, but it was like, you could still like get all your music on it. It's an MP3 player. It looked like, you could hardly tell the difference between a regular iPod Nano and this, and it was a vape. And it's like, okay, that's not marketed towards adults at all. That's so that a kid can be sneaky. But where was the oversight with these companies making these vapes that are obviously marketed towards kids, and that's incredibly damaging for these kids? It just that those themes kind of connected to me. It's like we're tanking Instagram, and now we're making it so it's it's marketed towards kids, and it's teen Instagram, when it's really like a lot of maybe you aren't going to see, I don't know, pornography on there, but you're still
But
that
like
addictive quality of it is still there, and
this,
it's
yeah.
still sucking your life, and
And
you're
probably you could see some level of porn because
right.
like they can
It's
access that.
impossible
Yeah.
to, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So I've really loved our conversation today. And because you told me that you listen to my podcast
Hmm.
episodes, which like just warms my heart. Thank you for
I recommend it to people, other
Oh,
educators. Yeah, I think it's
oh,
important.
thank you. I really, really appreciate that support. So, but at the end of every episode, I have like a takeaway, like two takeaways,
Hmm.
right? Like one and the other.
Right.
My friend recommended this to me. She's like, when you do this, this is something you should do. I was like, okay.
This is so there's like research around this. So like this has been a big push with my teachers this year is like you need to have closure in your classes. So
Mm.
when the kids leave the class, they need to know what they learned today. And there's lots of ways to do that, but a simple way is just like, hey, tell me some things you learned today. And it refreshes in their mind and kind of crystallizes to them like, hey, I actually learned something today. I had this objective, and rather than just, oh crap, okay, class is over, we're done. Like kids can now leave the classroom knowing, yep, I learned something today because I was reminded of it at the end of class. So you're you're fitting right in with education and pedagogy and all that fun stuff.
I love it. Thank you for validating what I do at the end of my episodes.
Yeah.
This is awesome. So, but I have two takeaways. So, would you mind going first? I always go first.
Oh man. Okay.
You don't have to. I can. I always come up with.
The big thing to me is just will you repeat that with that Boise, the taking the media more social, less media
In our school communities.
that
I tacked that on at the end.
yes,
In our school
yes.
communities.
More social, less media in our school communities. I think that really encapsulates a lot of what we've discussed. Just getting kids together and just the idea of school communities where it's not just the school, it's the community itself, because like it should be that. Like it shouldn't just be teachers and students over here and then parents just kind of have to, well, I hope things are going well there. It should all be integrated and we're combined in. So yeah, I guess that's what I would go. I really like that statement. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. So, one of the things that you kind of said as you were like describing what you're doing in Middleton, it made me kind of think of like some of the things that I've heard around the state, which is where like, Middleton's not a rural school. It's not considered rural, or is it? Is it in the classification? I actually don't know.
I think we're technically like do they have like a suburban classification?
Something.
Yeah, I don't think we're quite rural. Like
Not anymore. Maybe they
it's
were.
it definitely was. We're definitely a changing community that way.
So, but like, I mean, you've got your small community there.
Oh,
Let's just say you've got your small community and you've got your one high school. And I think a lot of rural schools around the state, 70% of our school districts are rural in Idaho. And I think a lot of them sometimes almost, even though they love it and they love being there, sometimes I think they feel like maybe they're not providing as much of an academic or right as if their kids are missing out on some things because there is this West Ada Boise, kind of visual in the state. Because, I think 60% of our kids in the state go to,
one of those two districts.
yeah, right. Or in the Treasure Valley somewhere. And so, but like what you're describing, like what you've been doing at Middleton to me is the beauty of like being able to bring together our like smaller or medium school communities that like when we have people who are intentionally working on this and drawing upon the awesome people who are there, incredible things can come out of this. And that is beautiful. That's like, I mean, I experienced that. I felt like when I was growing up in my small town, that's what I love about like what my kids get in Eagle. Like Eagle's a little bit different in the West Ada,
in the West. That about Eagle.
Yeah. That like these are, I mean, TJ Erickson, when he was just on, like he kind of was talking about that too. Like, we have this community that has like this, like one high school here. So when we get that experience, and I would say that like, West Ada and Boise, maybe some of our districts that have bigger schools, they could do something like this. They just have to work harder at it, to do that. But this is a perk of being a medium or small community, is that you can get all these people working together and you can create this incredible experience, not just for the kids, but for everyone who's in a school community, because a school community is not just our students, our parents, and our teachers. It's the administration, it's community members, it's our business owners, it's our taxpayers, right?
Oh, yeah.
There are nonprofits. They're all the people who are there. They're all important to our school community, and we can create beautiful things when we bring the people together. But what is true is that we need those leaders, those innovators who are bringing those people together. We need more of those people to rise in our school communities, and in a way that's like, we need them to rise so they can help other people rise to the occasion and help our school community shine.
Yeah.
That's what I'm taking away from this.
I agree. And I mean, I would love to talk. We don't have time now, but I'd love to talk sometime. I think this is a conversation that just needs to happen. Is like, how do we get those people to rise? Like, how do we increase that pool of people? Because I think they're out there, but are we getting them into the education field in the first place? I don't know. I don't know if that's always the case. So
yeah. Well, let's have a conversation afterwards. I love it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been great having
Thanks,
you here.
Alexis.